I think we're doing great.
Unmuted. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to another Talk Math with your friends. It is my pleasure today to introduce a speaker, Kenan Ince. Kenan is a queer, non-binary Turkish Texan mathematician. Their research interests lie in the fields of knot theory and 3-4 manifold topology, teaching and using mathematics for social justice, topological data analysis, and the mathematical analysis of mechanical games such as Lights Out. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Kenan.
Hey, thank you so much, Jill, and thank you so much to those who are cameras on. I've been reading about how to get your students to turn their cameras on without forcing them to, because I believe that it's not ethical to force them to, and telling them something along the lines of my own talking and teaching suffers substantially when more than 2/3 of the class is cameras off has been the best the best idea that I've come up with so far. So I am gaining energy from all of you with cameras on and appreciate it. As Tian mentioned, my name is Kenan Ince. I wanted to just go ahead and drop the link to my slides for those who wanted to follow along on their computers. I posted it earlier as well, but there are some links in the slideshow that I know BK and I had talked a bit about them kindly posting in chat as the links come up in the slideshow. But if you access the slideshow, you should be able to click on the links directly as well. And modeling a little bit of my own and all mathematicians' own sort of lack of expertise at teaching math for social justice. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm very interested in hearing your reactions and questions in real time. And the wonderful organizers have agreed to monitor chat and help me out as I screen share. So thank you for that. Yeah, so I am by no means the be all and end all of teaching math for social justice, but I think it is something that benefits from being able to sit with a little bit of uncertainty and a little bit of lack of expertise and model a sort of beginner's mind type thing. So this talk is called Just Mathematics, Why and How to Teach Math for Social Justice. It's meant to be sort of more of an introduction for those who are doing it for the first time, but at the second half of the talk, I plan on talking a bit about even designing a whole course to teach social justice math, if that's something you're interested in. So thank you all so much again for being here. And so I am currently living in so-called Salt Lake City, which is located on the unceded lands of the Ute, Goshute, and Shoshone peoples. There's this awesome map here, thanks Brian, where you can view the, view those whose land you live on if you are in, I believe the US, Canada, Pacific. It has a lot of like historical tribal maps. And I guess I wanted to just talk a little bit about this current bizarre context that we're in, where I am giving you a talk over a video chat app to a mixture of black screens and people with cool looking natural backgrounds and people's offices at home. So I believe that math for social justice matters more than ever during COVID-19, during the pandemic. Math for social justice is specifically, in my experience and in some of the research, a tool for increasing student engagement, because it's specifically, you know, we go to students and we say, what do you care about in your communities? What issues of justice, fairness, and equity are important to you? And how can we connect the math that you're learning in order to help you do the things that you want to do with your life anyway and advocate for the things that you're passionate about. So I've found it to increase student engagement and buy-in at a time when I know for probably most or all of us, it's been pretty difficult to get student buy-in. Social justice issues have also both arisen and been exacerbated during the pandemic. So for example, access to healthcare, ability to socially distance, the ability to safely isolate, the ability to take off work, Those people have lost jobs and not had access to sufficient unemployment. So all of these existing inequities and issues of justice are even more important right now. And we had a civil rights movement that has been continuing under largely under the banner of Black Lives Matter. And over the last year, that movement sort of exploded even more into the national consciousness. And so I've found students at this time have been more passionate than ever about issues of racial justice, economic justice. And finally, we're living in this pandemic, and the word pandemic comes from the Greek for all the people, pandemos. So to sort of paraphrase this great article I read, the pandemic is us. It's all of our collective actions as all of the people. And I believe that a lot of folks are thinking about how tightly we're all bound together societally during this time, more tightly than we could have imagined. Injustice faced by some folks, say, related to lack of ability to socially distance, affects us all. And so we're even more bound together than ever before. And these UNICEF posters kind of get at these pre-existing conditions that social injustice had already created before the pandemic started. So that's a little bit about context right now, but I wanted to dig into the question of why would someone want to teach social justice math a little bit more, given that we're not actually formally trained in this for the most part. And thanks to BK for dropping this literature review that I did several years ago about some of the research that shows greater effectiveness in student learning from a social justice math approach. So for example, this McGee 2014 study and the other studies cited here have shown that teachers of social studies and math focus surprisingly little on sexism and racism in their classrooms. And in math, this may stem some from the myth of math's objectivity, quote unquote. And as instructors, we may consider or have considered in the past social justice issues as sort of out of the scope of a math classroom. But researchers have actually confirmed that culturally relevant teaching practices that that center your own students' lived experiences, their own identities in teaching, contribute to greater equity in student outcomes, and they are actually, students taught using the social justice approach have performed statistically significantly better than a control group. So the winter 2007 study was actually a controlled experiment, where one section of a course was taught with a social justice frame and one was not. And students in the social justice approach exceeded the control group scores by 11.9% and had fewer students with a failing grade, a grade of D or lower in the class. So there is actually evidence that teaching math for social justice improves student learning, which is one reason we might care about it. Secondly, math is already political. So for example, in the book Weapons of Math Destruction, Kathy O'Neill talks a bit about how big data models, algorithms in fields like finance, education, advertising, employment, employee evaluation, credit, insurance, and civic life, all of these algorithms inherit the bias of their creators, sometimes implicit or explicit. And O'Neill says, quote, "This creates a pernicious feedback loop." So if we're talking about policing data, neighborhoods that are already over-policed will generate more policing data. That data will justify in turn more policing. And so even if a model is explicitly colorblind, the result of it can be anything but colorblind. So there's a need for mathematicians and data scientists that are able to take into account the social impacts of their algorithms and of the research that they're doing. Growing up in the US, we internalized these specific implicit and explicit biases against folks of marginalized groups without actively working to counter our biases. Even if, say, we, quote, strive to treat everyone the same, bias will still be perpetuated. So if we imagine like a patient with a chronic illness, that illness could be social injustice, racism, sexism, ableism, you name it. These are chronic illnesses, and if the patient is not going to admit or think about or discuss an illness, the prognosis is substantially worse than if it's diagnosed and a plan of treatment is developed. So the point is, we are already enmeshed in systems of injustice, and not thinking about them often results in perpetuating those systems. Those systems affect what we think of as worthy of mathematical inquiry. And I will, BK dropped the link to Kathy's talk, but I won't have time to go through the video here. The punchline is then, if we're already biased, right? If we're already, psychological studies have shown that bias is inherited just by growing up in our current society, why not be biased toward greater democracy? Social justice is all about diagnosing, discussing, and using all possible resources to treat the illness of inequity and injustice that still permeates us. And at its heart, social justice, in my mind, is in fact, one way I might define it is as a greater fulfillment of the democratic ideal. Everyone should have inalienable rights, such as the right to vote without substantial barriers being thrown in their way. Everyone's vote should count the same. People shouldn't be pushed into worse schools or dangerous environmental conditions or greater risk of police brutality due to factors outside their control, due to just having a marginalized identity. This is already happening, and mathematics, as a study that has relevance for the real world, has to acknowledge it, in my mind. So moving from the sort of moral reasons to teach math for social justice to maybe more pedagogical, I've excerpted a bit of student feedback on this slide. So these are some reasons that may matter in promotion or tenure reviews for folks. This comes from a reflection on change assignment inspired by Elizabeth Thorin. And these are some student responses connected to agency that I won't read at you. But I will point out that the second bullet point, I literally just submitted an application to do research with this student over the summer this morning. It came from a student that 2 years ago took my Social Justice by the Numbers course, which is listed as a social and behavioral sciences course. And this student is not someone who thought of himself as someone who could do math before taking this class. But in his own words, the student was inspired to seek out as many data science courses as possible, because in this math class, in this Social Justice by the Numbers course, he realized that if he wanted to achieve his goals of promoting greater justice, learning data science is actually a really effective tool. So getting student buy-in and promoting math as something that is for all students can be an impact of social justice math as well. And I honestly am okay with being interrupted with questions if they come up, so let me know. Here are some reflections connected to social engagement. One of the college-wide learning goals of my institution is promoting, quote, global responsibility. So here are some reflections about sort of how students have been connected to issues of social justice going forward by taking this class. So in my anecdotal experience, social justice math courses can provide students who aren't necessarily already interested in math at all, just taking a course for a requirement, for example, that math is actually this living, breathing, creative field. In the words of Jordan Ellenberg, it's an atomic powered prosthesis that you attach to your common sense, vastly multiplying its reach and strength. And if we use math as this atomic powered prosthesis to advance issues of social justice, students often come out feeling more empowered to change the world around them. So in this course, I'm actually reaching, I would say, only 1 out of the 25 students comes into this course already a math major. So the vast majority of the students who take this course come in because they're interested in social justice, and so I'm reaching a broader student population and inviting more students into mathematics by teaching a course in social justice math. So that's sort of the why, I guess.
So we had one question in the chat. Michael, do you want to ask it out loud?
Sure. Yeah, so my question was, it's, I think, really convincing and like rhetorically powerful to start with a like, well, you might think social justice is in competition with mathematics achievement, but here's the study that says we can do both. We can have social justice and that improves mathematics outcomes. And I just wanted to sort of raise the provocation about how we would make the case that that even if social justice framings trade off with traditional metrics of math performance or math learning, it's still worthwhile. And you've given a lot of factors there, but I think throughout that first part of the presentation, but just thinking in terms of the history of opposition to curriculum reform or curriculum change, there is always a metric by which the new curriculum performs worse than the old one. That's a fact of the history of math curriculum change. And so thinking about how you understand the measures of what makes a good curriculum, I think is really important when when thinking about challenges or changes to curriculum, and even thinking about like, how would you say that being able to perform mathematics in a social justice context is itself a learning outcome that traditional curricula miss? That's something that has to be valued separately or alongside. So I would raise that as a provocation, as a jumping off point from that opening that you gave. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michael. Wholly agree. I don't know if I could have said it better. I think that there's often a trade-off posed between preparing students to succeed in the current economic climate, for example, and teaching math in ways that that change the system for the better. But the bridges argument, as BK mentions, and I think that personally, like, if the existing system is designed to produce bombs, for example, I would rather like fail at making a bomb and turn that knowledge toward analyzing and combating police brutality, for example, or combating like war crimes. So yeah, I'd rather be worse at certain things that may be valued as outcomes. What other thoughts or questions or anything is there so far? Nice. Thanks, folks.
Oh.
Turner, I think, has a hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just had a question. So I'm getting a major in mathematics and a minor in teaching and learning justice. And like often in my education classes, like when we kind of come up with lesson plans and things, we talk a lot about like incorporating like resources that are from like people of color and things like that. But sometimes they're more like oriented in like the English sense, where you have like writings or passages or like bringing people in your classroom that like are members of community and things like that your students can relate to. And I was just curious on like what your thoughts are on like a similar idea in mathematics, like maybe bringing up like mathematicians that maybe like that might not be like well known, that were like people of color or that like are doing important things like in society now and things like that, or if you do anything similar like in the classes or the things that you teach or anything like that.
Wholly agree. Yeah. So this is sort of a couple of slides ahead. I would agree with this framing that Jonathan Osler in his 2007, I believe, guide to Math for Social Justice, he divides social justice math into two categories. One of which is specifically who is invited into mathematics, who is seen as someone who can do mathematics. How can we expand math literacy in order to promote greater economic outcomes and greater achievement in the direction of whatever students want that achievement to mean. So I would definitely agree that it's important for students to see mathematicians that may have minoritized identities, and I would sort of lump that into the left-hand column of math literacy as a civil right. This link is not going well, apparently. The Radical Math site has had some issues recently, so let me actually see if I can drop this link in the chat real quick to this guide for teaching math for social justice by Jonathan Osler, because it's really, I think, a great resource. And thanks, Turner. I hope I addressed your question. So this link should hopefully work. And yes, so OM Paul in the chat posted it without the S in HTTPS, and that seems to be the issue. So if you take the S out of this link, because this is an old site, you might have to take the S out in order to make it work. Oops. So again, feel free to jump in with more questions if you have them. But moving a bit on to, okay, if we agree that teaching math in a way that promotes greater democracy, greater social justice is valuable, how do we do it? For a population that is not usually formally trained in any way to talk about issues of social justice, how can we bring social justice into the math classroom? So I've been inspired by such a constellation of people, some of whom are in this call currently, to learn how to implement these lessons. And I'm by no means an expert myself, but I would like to think I've had some success with them, and I wanted to pass on some of the things that stuck most with me. And one of which is simply staying responsive to student interests and being flexible. So I'll just mention a case at my college. A couple of years ago, the college announced an $8,000 tuition increase per year. And out of that, student activist groups formed to protest the tuition increase and to advocate to the administration for at least a lower rise in tuition, effectively. And so inspired by Dave Kung's willingness to change class plans on short notice to address issues of importance to students, he is one of the people whose social justice math class inspired mine. I opened a class late last semester with a discussion of that tuition increase. Why it would have happened, my college's justification was they needed to match the tuition of their peer institutions, quote unquote. And so I basically just assigned a general discussion about students' feelings, followed by a conversation about what statistics, numbers, or other mathematical analyses, for example, knowing more about the college's budget and other potential sources of revenue for the college, might help students understand the situation better and advocate better for the student body. So being responsive to things that students already care about and that are issues that are already on people's minds can be pretty powerful. I would also say, and I'll talk a bit more about framing lessons versus framing a course. I like to think of my course framework as being a solid mathematical foundation, like some sort of great textbook, for example, that that really provides a very strong mathematical foundation for students. And I will follow the math from that book, but within each lesson, I try to frame the lessons around a specific social justice issue. So I actually have my students vote on which topics they're interested in related to social justice, and I fit those social justice issues to the math. And so I'll give an example of that in one moment. Oops, sorry. But going back to these two components of social justice math real quick. So we already talked a bit about math literacy. Specifically, we know that through the work of people like Bob Moses of the Algebra Project, that algebra and generally having a good math foundation is a prerequisite often for students' economic success. So if we want to promote economic success for all students, especially students who are already being marginalized or from marginalized groups, I believe that we owe these students a strong mathematical foundation. And Bob Moses says, today I want to argue the most urgent social issue affecting poor people and people of color is economic access. In today's world, economic access and full citizenship depend crucially on math and science literacy. quote from a former civil rights activist in the 60s. Secondly, the component that I might spend a little more time talking about today is actually studying these issues of social and economic justice in the math classroom. So specifically, how do we use math to better understand and even propose solutions to social injustice? So that's the right-hand column that I want to talk a bit more about now. So inspired by Jonathan Osler, we don't necessarily need you to put in this long link, but I actually have my students vote on which social justice issues they care about the most. And as a nice bonus, I can get a ranked choice poll so that it might later on serve as an introduction to voting methods as well. So students will vote using a ranked choice poll on all of these various social justice issues, each of which fit some of my quantitative reasoning goals for this course, and each of which I have a module that I've obtained either from an open access resource or some of the paid resources I'll show you later. So I have modules pre-prepared for each of these topics, and very few of these modules were made by me. There's actually a fair amount out there already, so that you don't have to do the work of creating effectively an entire textbook yourself. That's definitely not something you would have to do. There is actually, if you know where to look, a good amount of pre-existing resources that you can use. So another goal that Jonathan Osler advocates for in that document that BK and others shared the link to earlier is having a solution-based component. And so effectively, the issue is that if we just talk to students about how screwed up things are, for lack of a better phrase, that's not necessarily that empowering for students. At the very least, it's really powerful for students to see what solutions to injustice math proposes. And I honestly have not ever fully achieved being as solutions-based as I would like in this course. But as some examples, I assign a semester project where students are told they need to use math to investigate an issue of social justice that's important to them or in their own communities, and propose some sort of solution based out of the math that they use. So for example, one group of students worked on gender-neutral restrooms in local colleges and universities. Their goal was to use data to understand how many gender-neutral restrooms were already available, or all gender restrooms, which I would probably prefer as a phrase, but more often they're called gender-neutral. So they analyzed 3 local colleges, and notice there's a bit of a solutions-based component here, because they actually researched the cost of converting restrooms that were previously gendered, but unnecessarily so, often single-stalled restrooms that were either men's restrooms or women's restrooms. And they researched how much it would cost to convert them to gender-neutral restrooms and passed out flyers at local college campuses to advocate for this. So they're not using any math that's too fancy, but what they are doing is utilizing quantitative literacy to try to make a change in the world around them, which is one of my major learning goals for this course. And they also, as you see, they did some data analysis here. They broke down the different amounts of restrooms in various dining areas. The U is the University of Utah, and then Westminster is my institution, and the local community college were the 3 institutions they looked at. And they split it into, how many gendered versus non-gendered restrooms there were in the area. So the semester project for me is one way of trying to bring a more solutions-based component into this class, so that they're not just left feeling, the world is completely screwed, what's the point? Which can be a pitfall for activists that I have fallen into at times in my life too. So partnering with local organizations, finally, is one of the tips that Osler recommends. And this is honestly something that I have not yet been able to do to the extent that I would like. I have something in mind that would be really cool. There's a local school district that provides after school and out of school programs. It's a lower income area, and one of the goals of the after school programs is to keep students in a safe environment and to promote higher passing rates. Their math passing rate has really struggled for students historically. And so this local organization wants to know, what are the demographics of the students that come to our after school or out of school programs? And so one thing that I have communicated with them about in the past, but sadly not yet gotten to do, is have a semester project team of students or two do this data analysis for the local organization, right? So like often local organizations won't, especially nonprofits or like local government organizations, will not turn down a little bit of free data gathering or data summarizing. And it doesn't even have to be very sophisticated. I think it's been pleasantly surprising to me the extent to which students can actually participate in civic life through social justice math. Continuing to run through Osler's, what I see is incredibly helpful tips from his guide. Start small, right? So you don't have to immediately create an entire course of social justice math. My journey, for example, started with learning about Gini coefficients in a calculus course, which measure things like income inequality by country, and adding a lesson on Gini coefficients to an existing calculus course, and having students think a bit about the socio-political implications of the Gini coefficients that they found. And from there, I sort of tried to frame my intro statistics class around police use of force, because I was teaching it right after the 2015 wave of Black Lives Matter protests. And so it was already something on students' minds. I assigned just 3-ish readings on statistics of police use of force by race, and had students think about the same kind of questions that I want them to think about throughout a statistics course. Who benefits from this representation of data? What tools and analyses are used? What are some potential pitfalls, lurking variables, et cetera, that could impact these studies? So really doing the same sort of mathematical work that I was already doing, just turning that mathematical analysis toward a social justice issue instead. And then only then did I eventually compile enough materials to create a course. And I very much benefited from being at a liberal arts college where having interdisciplinary first-year seminar courses is pretty common. So your mileage may vary depending on your type of institution, for sure. Not everyone has to create a course, obviously. These essential question things, I want to focus a bit more on and even do something a little bit interactive with them. So I'm trying to be mindful of all of your time. So I'm just going to go ahead and briefly talk about a model for introducing a social justice issue into a math class here. So this comes from an article by Winter from 2007 called Teaching Technical Subjects for Social Justice. Winter's model effectively says, okay, if you're designing a lesson, start with a description of the social situation. So, assign students readings, for example, about police brutality or about environmental justice issues, if they're building a disproportionate amount of refineries in neighborhoods with largely people of color. People who've written about these things, I can ask them to pull out a little bit of the data from the article and think about the data and where it came from. So students will start off by just thinking about the social situation and identify a problem of injustice in that situation. The top half of this diagram represents the socio-political sphere. So all of this work so far is being done in the socio-political sphere. The math comes in then when we model, drawing upon students' prior mathematical learning, we model the actual social injustice issue using math somehow. And so, for example, maybe we want to know, is it disproportionately likely for Black or Indigenous residents of Los Angeles County to be subject to police force? Identifying some sort of question that we can then model using the mathematics that are my learning objectives for the course. Students will restate the problem in the mathematical realm, solve the mathematical problem in the police brutality example, perhaps using a chi-squared analysis, and then interpret that solution back in the socio-political realm. What is the meaning of that result for the actual situation? You know, if our residuals from the chi-squared test are X and Y, what does X and Y mean for people of color living in the area? So it's kind of intuitive in some ways that this is the model you want to use, but I like having a sort of diagram that reminds me to frame everything with the social issue. This really grounds in students' interests as well. All right, so I guess then I wanted to share as many resources as I have found for teaching college or university math for social justice. So as far as I know, until very recently, there weren't any comprehensive guides or resources for college and university social justice math. Certainly not databases of resources that exist in K through 12. But that's changing rapidly, thankfully. And one of the main reasons I've heard a lot more discussion of teaching math for social justice has been around this Kajabi collection that came out in 2019. So I'll just really quick point you to this Google Drive folder, which is a collection of all of the open access resources that I know of for teaching college or university math for social justice that I maintain. If you know of materials that aren't in the folder and would like to recommend them, you can do them at that tiny URL. And I will, in a second, give you some time to look through the resource table, which lists the resources that are in this folder, and design your own possible social justice math lesson. So making sure folks have access to those links. So the largest collections, and maybe if you're short on time and just want to know, you know, what is one thing that one book that I can go to have a bunch of lesson plans to plug into students' interests. This Kajabi book is the one I would recommend. It's really fulfilled a need that I've felt for years to have a guide of pre-made resources and lesson plans for teaching college math for social justice. And they are coming out with a second collection focused on quantitative reasoning and statistics, which is expected this year, but I am not sure what the current status is. I've tried to leave out K through 12 resources as much as possible from my resource collection, but one exception I made was this book on the right, which is Berry et al. High School Mathematics Lessons to explore, understand, and respond to social injustice. Because despite the word high school, I've really gotten a lot of good resources for service and pre-service courses from the right-hand collection. And so, like, I mean, you know, if you want your students to be able to interpret two-way tables and make stacked bar graphs to represent demographics, for example, there's a lesson plan in this book that will help with that. So there's a lot of very, very relevant lesson plans in both of these collections, enough, I would say, to even center a course around by themselves. The guides for how you might implement these social justice math lessons, in addition to the first section of Kajabi, this Osler resource I've already linked you to, the winter article simultaneously has an experiment showing the learning gains that I mentioned earlier for social justice math, but it also actually has pedagogical models and lesson plan ideas in it. So I think this winter 2007 article, Teaching Technical Subjects for Social Justice, is another great resource. All of this is linked from the resource database I shared earlier as well. And finally, we've got this venerable but aging database that was originally created for middle school and high school educators called Radical Math. I actually have created a short link to the web archive version because you can still search its database. You just have to do it from the web archive instead of the actual website because its search box is broken. But it has years, maybe over a decade, I would say, of accumulated social justice math lesson plans in a wide range of subjects. So again, you don't have to start from scratch. There are people that have already created these lesson plans, including this Primus issue, volume 29, issue 3-4, which is specifically on social justice math and contains resources connected to calculus, quantitative reasoning, data science, and more. Again, all of this is linked from the resource folder. So I wanted to end with actually doing something interactive. I am sorry for talking at you for 45 minutes. It's really sad how even though I do my best to be interactive in my classroom, it's not always something I achieve as much as I would like in talks. But that said, let me move toward stopping talking at you by giving a few steps for how you might develop your own social justice math lesson. So inspired by still the Osler collection, the first step would be to identify your mathematical learning objectives, right? Suppose you are teaching a calculus course and you want to try implementing one social justice math lesson in that calculus course. The first step would really be to identify whatever your learning goals are for that course. For a different example, in a statistics course, students may need to summarize the relationship between categorical variables using two-way tables, compute expected counts, and sort of preview chi-squared tests for goodness of fit. This is just one example learning objective. So I've identified my mathematical concept and I want to start there. Second, I would give a poll similar to the ranked choice one I showed you earlier, where students would tell me what issues they cared most about. And I actually gave that poll earlier this semester, and students highly voted on racial justice as one of the things they wanted to discuss. Not terribly surprising given how dominant it's been in the news lately. And finally, you want to create these broad, open-ended things called essential questions. Obviously, this is not the only way to do it, but the essential questions are a helpful framing tool for students. So they should have multiple correct answers, these questions, and you often don't want to drill down too much. So even something as broad as, how can statistical exploration contribute to understanding and fighting for racial justice? Something as broad as that is a good question to center your lesson plan around. Oops. I might be going too fast anyway, so it's good that I lost my place. Here we go. When you're actually talking to your students, you want to start by introducing the social justice issue. So in this example, I would have them free write. What do you know about policing? Even what sort of social media activism or sharing have you done related to policing? A notice and wonder type question, right? What do you notice and wonder about the current state of racial bias in policing? I often have students read an article before class and come to class having read it and having pondered a few reading questions. In this example, I would use the quote Barbecue Becky article. This was in Oakland in, I think, I forget when now. But not too long ago in Oakland, a woman who called the police over a barbecue that had a bunch of Black folks at it at a lake in Oakland. And then I would have at the very beginning of class, students have read this article, they've thought about it, come right in and do a think, pair, share, and a whole group discussion on how they think race is relevant, what other race-related incidents have they heard about. And so after sort of doing this introductory framing, then the math comes in, and only then does the math come in. And the math should be motivated by the social justice issue as well as the essential question. So in this example, students would actually fill out a worksheet which has them look at these contingency tables based on who the Oakland Police Department searched by race. This comes from the Berry et al. Resource collection, which is linked again from the Google Drive folder that I shared with you earlier. And so students already are thinking about, okay, if there was no discrimination, how many white people versus Black people would I expect to be searched? So they're already getting toward expected counts in a chi-squared test that way. Thinking about the observed table and filling in the totals in the table then gives them the expected versus observed counts, which chi-squared tests are designed to compare directly. So this would accomplish that learning goal of previewing chi-squared and getting them thinking about how much difference in these two tables is too much, right? How much difference would be, and it would actually show that there was some sort of bias going on versus how much could just be due to chance alone. And so you're getting at these big statistical questions. And finally, I wanted to end by giving y'all maybe, I guess we have 12 minutes total left. So I wanted to give y'all maybe like, say 10-ish minutes in breakout rooms. So just breaking down a few of the steps that we've already talked about, think about a class where you might like to introduce a social justice math lesson or unit. Go to your learning objectives for that course or think up a few learning objectives if you haven't already. And then out of these 3 links, these are 3 tables full of social justice math resources. The first one is my own database. The second one comes from the Kurali Kajabi resource collection, which you can obtain a desk copy of through MAA Press. And the last one is the Radical Math resource table, which is excellent specifically for pre-service or quantitative reasoning courses. So pick at least one of those 3 tables, only use the last one for quantitative reasoning or pre-service courses. And then start thinking about how you might implement such a lesson. Create some essential questions similar to the ones that we've discussed. Another example of an essential question would be, does race play a factor in who is getting mortgage loans in our city, for example? These questions should bridge the math and social justice components. And then finally, share your essential question and your resources that you have connected to your learning objectives with each other. And we can I can circulate and just check in with folks, and then you'll also talk to each other and help each other workshop these ideas. And yeah, so let's take a moment in breakout rooms to try this out. Feel free to follow along on the Prezi and look at these 4 steps or screenshot it and whatever you need for your breakout rooms.
So Kenan, would you like me to split the breakout rooms for you?
It should be, I can do it real quick actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got, looks like 3 to 4 is pretty good. So whenever folks think they've gotten their steps written down here, I'll just open the rooms that you can join when you're ready.
Here they come, Kenan.
All right, I think everyone's back. Sorry for the relative shortness of that. I hope you have at least the germ of something. I have dropped another link in this presentation where I sort of, when I was designing my social justice math course, I sort of like lined up several essential questions in a row and tried to have students vote on their favorites and cover the questions in an order that made mathematical sense. So for those of you who are interested in moving beyond a single unit and even thinking about designing a course, I hope some of these resources, again, all in that Google Drive folder, are helpful. And I don't want to keep you over to respect your time, so I'll just bring up my last slides. And as maybe I'll leave you with this quote from Osler, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you all so much for your time.
You join me in thanking Kenan?